All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Because if you look at the data, May 15th, 2026 is gearing up to be a massive pivot point at the Federal Reserve, and it is going to directly impact your wallet. Most people, they won't even realize what's happening until they literally feel it in their bank accounts. But by understanding the mechanics of this shift right now, you can position yourself to not just survive it, but actually thrive. So here's the root of the whole issue. The United States is currently sitting on a staggering $39 trillion in national debt. But honestly, the total number isn't even the scariest part. It's the payments. Right now, the interest payments alone are costing over $1 trillion a year. Let that sink in. That makes interest the fastest growing expense for the US government, literally more than the military, more than infrastructure. A massive chunk of the nation's tax revenue is just being swallowed up to service past expenses. To understand how to navigate this, we're going to cover four things. 1, the $39 trillion debt crisis. 2, history's answer, which is financial repression. 3, the upcoming three-point policy shift. And 4, how to protect your personal wealth. Starting with Section 1, the $39 trillion debt crisis. To manage this ballooning debt, the administration is eyeing a major pivot. Now, because the Federal Reserve is independent, current Chair Jerome Powell can't just be fired. But his term naturally expires on May 15th, 2026. At that exact moment, the expectation is that Kevin Warsh will step in. And he's bringing a completely different monetary agenda to the table, one that is heavily focused on dragging interest rates down. This quote really hits the nail on the head. You see, unlike in the past where the government locked in 10, 20, or 30-year loans at super low rates, lately they've been relying heavily on 1 to 2-year loans. It's exactly like having a massive adjustable rate mortgage. Anytime the Fed keeps interest rates high, the cost of servicing that $39 trillion debt just skyrockets. To stop bleeding cash, the government absolutely needs interest rates to drop, and they need them to drop fast.
Which brings us to Section 2, history's answer. Financial repression. Check this out. After World War II, back in 1946, we had a massive debt crisis. We owed $271 billion against a $222 billion economy. That is a 106% debt to GDP ratio. But jump ahead to 1974, the absolute debt actually went up to $475 billion, yet the ratio dropped to a highly manageable 25%. How on earth did they do that? Well, the economy just grew much faster than the debt. Today, heading into 2026, we are sitting at an alarming 125%. They need to pull off that exact same post-WW2 magic trick all over again. They pulled off that post-war miracle through something called financial repression. I know it sounds a bit intense, but it's basically a strategy to make the government richer by making savers poorer. They do this by utilizing artificially low interest rates and essentially forcing institutions to buy government bonds. Imagine the government pushing institutions to lend them money at, say, a 2% rate, while actual inflation in the economy is running somewhere between 5 and 10%. By keeping those borrowing rates below the rate of inflation, the government effectively gets free money to invest and grow the economy. Their debt actually shrinks in real terms. But on the flip side, anyone just holding cash in a bank account is slowly losing their purchasing power. The government gets richer and the everyday saver gets poorer. Moving on to Section 3, the three-point policy shift. So Kevin Warsh has proposed a very specific three-point plan to execute this transition. Step 1, cut interest rates. Step 2, shrink the balance sheet. And Step 3, rely on AI for cost reduction. The whole goal here is to orchestrate this financial repression without sparking the kind of out-of-control inflation that absolutely crushes the everyday consumer. First up, he aims to aggressively cut the current interest rate by a full 1% within his first 12 months. In Fed terms, that is a massive cut. The administration has made it very clear that they want the United States to have the lowest interest rates of any developed country out there. Here's where it gets real. If inflation is hovering around 3% and the Fed drops its rates to 2.75%, we cross a magic threshold. Because rates are now lower than inflation, the government's $39 trillion debt instantly becomes cheaper to service. But for you and me, that is exactly when our savings start actively melting away. Second, Warsh wants to shrink the Fed's balance sheet. Basically, he wants the Fed to stop printing money to buy government debt and to actually start selling off its existing treasuries. Normally, if the Fed stops buying, interest rates would spike because there are fewer buyers in the market. But Warsh is banking on massive private demand from banks, foreign countries, and everyday investors to step in and buy up these bonds.
The big risk here? Well, if private demand falters, history shows the government might literally regulate institutions into buying them, just to guarantee buyers, exactly like they did in the 1940s. And finally, step 3. How do you cut interest rates without sending inflation straight to the moon? Warsh believes artificial intelligence is the ultimate deflationary tool to offset those interest rate cuts. He argues that massive advancements in AI will boost business efficiency and productivity so much that it'll keep consumer prices low even while the Fed is aggressively cutting rates. It is a really fascinating modern twist on a classic economic playbook. All right, Section 4, protecting your personal wealth. We've looked at the macro picture, but what does this actually mean for your hard-earned money? And more importantly, how can you benefit from this shift? The stark reality of financial repression is that inflation acts as a hidden tax. The losers here are savers holding cash, CDs, and standard bank deposits. If you're earning 1 or 2% in a checking account, but inflation is running at 3% or more, your wealth is quietly evaporating. But the winners? Those are the investors holding appreciating assets. As the value of the dollar drops, the nominal value of tangible assets goes up, simply because it takes more weakened dollars to buy that exact same asset. To outpace this hidden tax and really protect your long-term wealth, history shows you've got to convert a piece of your paycheck into hard assets. Stocks, for example, work exceptionally well because companies can simply raise their prices to match inflation. Real estate is phenomenal because it acts as a hard asset holding fixed debt, meaning you get to pay back your mortgage with cheaper dollars over time. And scarce assets like gold or Bitcoin historically protect against currency devaluation. When the government keeps money cheap, all that excess liquidity flows directly into these specific asset classes, shielding you from the devaluation of the dollar. As this quote says, at the end of the day, you need to do something outside of just hoarding cash. You have to own assets. The absolute worst place for your money during a period of financial repression is sitting idle in a bank account or locked up in a low-yield CD. Now, market volatility and recessions, they're always going to happen. But over the long run, transitioning your mindset from a saver to an owner of assets is absolutely your greatest defense. Understanding this playbook gives you a massive advantage over the general public, who honestly will probably only notice prices creeping up at the grocery store. The rules of the game are shifting on May 15th, 2026. So, as this massive policy shift unfolds, how will you choose to position your portfolio? Are you going to let that hidden tax chip away at your savings, or will you use this knowledge to become an investor and build generational wealth? The choice is entirely yours.